Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, January 2nd. Happy New Year. This is your Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting. We will call this meeting to order. Our first item is the Metro Management Council report. I was absent. I am slowly recovering from pneumonia, and so Councilor Kiley, I will look for you for the update.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I have served on this this particular board for 4.5 years now, and it is one of my favorite boards that I do serve on, as they play a very vital role in the city of Sioux Falls as well as our surrounding communities. And it's not normal for us to be giving a report on this particular board, but I think it's good that we do that going forward and that we do it with the other boards that many of us participate in, such as the Siouxland Museum Board and the Homeless Advisory and the intergovernmental boards. I think it would be good to have those as a standard practice reports when we do that. So I'm happy to give this report here this afternoon. First of all, we had a special meeting this past Friday, December 28th at 7:30 a.m. and it was called just really a matter of days, in the week preceding that. As you probably know, our director, Paul Niederinghaus, had announced that he had a job offer that he could not refuse. And so actually today is his last day, and I want to wish Paul best of luck with the Fusion Center. They're getting a good person and leaving behind some big shoes to fill on our end. But anyway, Paul wanted to get together to have a discussion about replacing his position, and then something that I wasn't even aware was really going to be part of the discussion. He also wanted to have a discussion on the future structure and governance and oversight of the Metro communications and our 911 system, because he had some concerns about its current structure and the sustainability of Metro 911 as it exists. In particular, since it is a standalone entity, and that happened years ago, it had been part of the county, but then years ago they had decided that it was best to be an independent entity. And I believe it's worked out very well, but there are some challenges, in particular, because it's a small group. The health care is rather expensive for a smaller group versus having the ability to tap into larger entities like the city or the county. So there's an additional expense there. Also, of course, that all falls under the area of HR. And so there was discussion surrounding, well, the city already has an HR department, the county has an HR department. Is there a way that Metro Management could tap into one of those to secure the health coverage at a more affordable cost, not only for the employees, but for Metro itself. And then in addition to that, we had discussion about the same thing is true with payroll, with the finance department, and with legal. So it was kind of decided that we would get our legal team together to review what are the possibilities, what could be done, how could we structure it in such a way where we could tap into city resources or county resources. And I want to make it very clear that this suggestion was not coming from the city. This suggestion was not coming from any of the county members, but it was just something that outgoing director Paul Niederinghaus thought that we should address for just sustainability into the future. So it was decided that they were going to meet with the legal teams in the city and the county and see how it could be structured in such a way. Could we do something that we're already doing with Siouxland libraries, because there's a joint relationship that exists there? Is it something that could be as simple as either the county or the city takes on these individuals as employees and then they invoice the other for their fair share. Because as it is right now, what expenses and overhead is not covered by the surcharge that we receive is divided by the city and the county. 75% of the leftover expenses are the city's responsibility, and the other 25% is the county. So it is something, and we're in a county building right now, and the county simply invoices the city for our share of the space in that county facility. So, you know, we were wondering, is it possible that we could just simply invoice the other entity for their share in these areas? So they're pursuing that and looking into that. We went into an executive session, and then we came out of an executive session, and we approved Resolution 18-03 to appoint an executive coordinator liaison for Metro Communications. And I'm here to tell you that Chief Deputy Sheriff Michelle Boyd is going to serve as that Metro liaison and transition coordinator. At our previous meeting with Metro, we'd already decided that Jessica Mundahl would fill the interim director position. And we decided that with some special items that Metro, that we've been looking into, that it would be good if we could keep Jessica focused on the day-to-day operations of Metro, and then have Michelle take over in this new position on a temporary basis. And by the way, this will all be paid for because our director position is vacant, and so therefore his salary is now available. So there's money to pay the extra money to Jessica Mundahl as well as Michelle Boyd. In fact, there's more than enough. There will be money left over. But anyway, Michelle will be charged mostly with continued the selection process for a new director, and to assist with the exploration of the sharing options that I just discussed earlier between city and county. And then the other item, to continue the exploration of a new Metro 911 site as that is needed, because we're currently out of space in the site now in the remodeled jail. And so we have explored either moving up into the second floor there, which we could do. It'd be extensive restructuring of the building to do that. And at the same time, then we are still without a backup center. So we're also looking at other sites off location and some other options that might be available, either teaming up with other city or county entities, or even looking into partnering with private too, if they should have the space. So those responsibilities will be basically that of Michelle going forward, as well as, and then there was one fourth item here. Michelle will also assist with the Zerker software contract and updates, because that comes due here as well too. So Michelle focusing on those four areas will allow Jessica to continue to look after the day-to-day operations at Metro. So those are the things that we did at the special meeting this past Friday, December 28th. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Councilor Kiley or other open discussion? Councilor Staley.
Yes, well, and thank you, Councilor Kiley, for that that overview. I also attended the meeting at 7:30 last Saturday morning.
Friday.
Friday morning. And one of the things I had asked the county about afterwards was that it was a little concerning to me that we didn't have that videotaped in any way. So I was taking notes during the time and putting them on Facebook, but I think any of these meetings that are in a venue where it can be recorded, it'd be nice if it was, so the public can watch the dialogue for themselves. A few things that I had written down on Facebook that I thought were interesting comments was, one of them was the mayor, our Mayor Tenhagen, asked how many other communities could be involved in this. Could we get Lincoln County involved in this Metro 911 center? And then Gerald Benninga, County Commissioner, made the comment that it could be a turnoff to some of these smaller communities to have the mayor of Sioux Falls running the whole show, if we would go back to the way it was before. And then Jeff Barth, our county commissioner, also suggested that we could have all governing bodies involved with this have one payroll system. So just some of that dialogue was very interesting for me to listen to. And again, I think in the future when we have meetings like that, it's nice to have it somehow archived and documented. A second issue I wanted to bring up for the council to consider moving ahead, and just to be aware of, is our stoplight issue when it
Excuse
snows.
me, Madam Chair.
Yes,
I'm
Counselor.
not sure if we're done with this issue yet, so if
Oh,
Councilor,
you want, sure.
Yeah, Counselor, why don't you go ahead and respond if you would?
I would just to make it clear, and I know that comment was made that it would be a turnoff if the city of Sioux Falls might take it over. We had some discussion about a lot of rural fire departments out there, and others too. But just to, again, be clear that this was not a suggestion that was coming from the city. It wasn't a suggestion coming from the county, but it was just a discussion of how to better sustain Metro 911 into the future. And we would like to get all governing bodies, and we have had extensive discussions regarding the potential of bringing Lincoln County in as well too, and even servicing some of the smaller PSAPs around the area and making our facilities, our backup facility, once we have a better backup, available to them for emergency bases too. So I think there's ample opportunity for cooperation and collaboration out there with surrounding counties and communities. So point well taken.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if I may respond, is that like Councilor Neitzert over there, Selberg, they really don't know how, they don't have an opportunity to watch this. So it's just, the reports that they're getting back from Councilor Kiley and myself about what actually transpired. So again, videotaping is good. So I have other things, but.
Go ahead, Counselor.
And that was something that I failed to just mention as well too. At that particular site, because they record the county meetings, I would think that would be a possibility. But we also have a lot of other meetings too, the CCOG meetings, the intergovernmental meetings that I think maybe you are a part of, Councilor Staley, that this isn't a standalone with that issue. I think there's others that, if possible, that should be looked into for those as well too.
And I will add to that as well that the UDC, CCOG, IRAB, Museum Board, HAB, Metro Government, I believe we have a representative on the bid board as well. All of those in the past, we have not been getting updates from all the council members that are attending those meetings. Councilor Kiley requested to be sure that he is prepping us on Metro Management Council as there's so many large changes taking place. So that will be a requirement of every councilor that we just self-impose on ourselves, that when you're attending these meetings in the capacity of your city council role, it is important for you all to be updating us at the commission report. And Tom will be putting those on our agenda. So just be prepared to give updates as you're attending those meetings. Sometimes there's more than one of us, like Councilor Kiley and I are both on Metro. However, I wasn't there, so obviously he'd be the one to do that. So just keep that in mind as we're moving forward with that. The other thing about these meetings are archived and documented on the Metro Management website, and they are posted there as well. And so the minutes will be on there, and they are open to the public for anyone to attend. I'm not sure if all the other meetings are, but I know Metro is one that is always noticed to the public. Any other conversations on Metro, and then we'll move to additional. Go ahead, Councilor.
So, clarifying question, was this just more of kind of him sharing his thoughts and his suggestions? I mean, is there clear next steps of what will happen, or this was just kind of thrown out there for all of us to consider?
And if I may, Madam Chair, it was Director Niederhouse request to address these items before he left. As I had mentioned, I thought the special meeting was just going to focus on the appointment of a new director, or where we're at with that, but Director Niederhouse requested that we add item number 3, the discussion on the future structure. And so that discussion was made. At this point, there isn't clear direction, but we did take his recommendations very seriously, and we're going to look into those, because I think if we could come up with some type of a structure that maintains some semblance of the independence that it currently has, but yet can tap into the resources from county or city, we're going to have even a better product. And as his concern was, that it'll be even more sustainable into the future.
Okay, and if I just and I know you will, but just making sure that it's, I guess, very deliberate, kind of keeping us updated along the way, because there could be major implications for both budgets, or especially if we take on employees and things like that, so we know well in advance. And maybe it ends up looking like a subgroup or something that looks into what he's talked about, so.
And that's a point well taken, Counselor. In fact, if we're able to initiate some of these changes, there's potential where it could have a positive impact on the budget, where it might even reduce some of these costs in these areas because of the value of dealing with large numbers versus smaller numbers when it comes to getting insurance for groups.
Thank you. The next item is administration.
Madam Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I had a couple of questions because I'm just a little confused yet. So that's where I was trying to, and if you would, Councilor Kiley, I was a little confused. So the Metro board is still looking to hire someone as the executive director, that we're still in an interim position because it was advertised and there weren't, I don't want to use the word qualified applicants, but not applicants that were sufficient for the job, or how, I guess I missed if this is a permanent process or if we're still going to advertise again and continue to solicit for an executive director.
That's a very, very good question, Counselor. Thanks for asking the question. That was discussed, and it was actually a suggestion by outgoing Director Paul Niederinghaus that if we can address some of these items that he had identified and that I just outlined prior to hiring a new director, that it might actually make it easier to attract a new director, because these are some items that are pretty big issues, and he expressed his concern about attracting well-qualified individuals that would have the desire to take on some challenges of that size immediately upon taking over their position. So I think we certainly have not shelved the idea of hiring a replacement for Director Niederinghaus. We're just going to look into what these other possibilities. We also encourage that the process should be expedited as much as possible, weeks rather than months, in terms of looking into these possibilities, so that we don't put this on the shelf for a long period of time.
No, totally makes sense. And like I said, I know it was a special meeting on Friday during the holidays for a lot of people, but I don't think the space issue is totally new by any means. In fact, when you go back and look at the minutes from this year, even in August, we're already talking about, I think Director Niederinghaus was talking about that maybe combine for a new location because the amount of space is gone. And then from that same meeting, he suggested that there may be an opportunity for Metro to be included in the new Sioux Falls Fire and Police Department Training Center. Not that they want to impede on the timeline or to take away from square footage of the current proposal. Being included in this building would also offer an opportunity to improve and enhance relationships with our partnering agencies. And then in the same director's report, he said that space needed for the new primary center is 10 to 12,000 square feet as a rough estimate of what the recommendation was going to be made. That's going to be a considerable building that's going to have a huge financial considerations for the city as well. And, going back as far as the minutes went to 2016, Director Ketchum, while he was there, was still talking about that he had provided a presentation of long-range agency facility planning efforts involving key city and county staff addressing space and equipment needs, which is kind of the ongoing process as I kind of pull away. But, as part of that, that same meeting on February 24th of 16, there was a motion that was made to identify and develop an effective backup center location through efforts with both city and the county staff, remodel and expand current primary location through efforts with the county and staff, identify and implement short-term improvements to current working environments, and then provide the following to the council for additional consideration. Present costs for up to 3 additional councils, and that's been taken care of. And then number 2 was identify square footage and physical needs for effective backup center, along with review of available existing community spaces for consideration by the council. And that was passed unanimously all the way back in 16. So this is not a new to the city or the county that we're short of space. The working conditions aren't necessarily the best for the staff that are there. That's part of the type of building that they need as well. You can't put big picture windows like we have in our new administration building in a building that needs to be secure in a weather situation or some type of natural disaster. So it's hard to give you a window for your council as you're looking out into the street and doing that. My overall point is that this is an ongoing thing that I think we're going to see some major budget implications in the next year, whether it's included in our new fire rescue and police training facility or if it's a separate. But I think there's also some concerns as we have a overall policy look at what we're doing as a city, talking about we need a backup data center as well, that I think has been part of the discussions that would have been incorporated in that. I know that Director Etten, when she was still with us, was talking about that that needed to be included as well, that we have all of our data storage as a city in one location or not in optimal locations. So trying to bring this all together as we plan the 2020 budget, I think is going to be key to where we're going. The one other thing that I wanted to point out as I went back through the minutes, it was kind of interesting, is that back on the meeting in March 8th of 2017, Councilor Rolfing addressed the council, the Metro Communications Council, recommending conversations begin now to be proactive rather than reactive to the needs and opportunities. He questioned the need for multiple duplicative departments within local government. He recommended the creation of a group now from all related organizations to meet and consider the possibilities. And that was basically 3 years ago. So we're doing those things and moving forward so the citizens aren't surprised when we look at a 12,000 square foot building that's going to have to be built as a fortress, for lack of a better way, to survive the elements in South Dakota weather, whether it's blizzards to tornadoes and those type of things. So definitely not something new and not a new opportunity, but one that's going to take some leadership to move us forward.
Councilor Kiley.
And Councilor Starr, you're exactly right. This is, in terms of the facility needs and with our primary center as well as our backup center, this is nothing new. I joined this board back in 2014, and I have been making a sincere effort to improve the facilities for our primary center because they're very lacking now. And I think every member on this council has had the opportunity to tour those facilities. So they're very, very lacking, and they offer a lot of challenges in terms of just hiring and retaining staff. So that's nothing new. Even our backup center, we've had and Councilor Starr, you're correct too, with the previous director of Metro, that we had discussions and toured the backup center, which is the fire headquarters down at 37th in Minnesota. And right now there's only 6 councils there. And we normally have 13 to 14 councils. So you'd be cutting the number of councils in half in an emergency situation where you're going to need even more councils. And so that has been something that we've been addressing for quite some time. And I would agree with you that at some point in the future, whether we were to make the decision to move upstairs in the jail and expand there, it's going to require a great deal of remodeling, which will involve a high cost to do so. And then that still leaves us without an adequate backup center. So then you'd have to build another backup center. So what we've been discussing is retaining the current center as the backup center, because it could probably withstand an F4 tornado where you're at, and then build another, or secure another center, either build or secure it through lease, if that's possible, off-site, and preferably where you have different electrical providers and things of that nature that you would need for a backup center. So there's most likely is going to be a price tag associated with this at some point in the future. And I do know that the current administration is looking at this very favorably. They see the need for moving forward, because when it comes down to it, when you pick up and dial 911, you'd like to have somebody answer on the other end. And we have had some issues, not in Sioux Falls, but there have been some of the other PSAPs in the areas that have recently experienced some of those issues. So there's, in my mind, there's nothing more important to address, and whether we're plodding through it or, you know, at a slow pace or not, we're trying to get there. But thank you for your comments, Councilor.
Councilor Staley?
Yeah, and just closing off on this, when you're talking about these different boards, I'm on the CCOG board myself. I had more interest in this because I think financially, I'll compare it to the museum board dealing with that new archive building, when we're actually going to be putting some city funds into something and looking at a new facility possibly. I think that's when I think we really need to be thinking about video recording this. But anyway.
I will say too, CCOG does have budgetary authority and policy making so as well. So that's equally as important when we talk about comparing the two different
I understand,
boards.
but we're not building a new building for CCOG right now, where we're going to be allocating funds.
They have the same ability. They have the same ability to make budgetary and things of that. So they have a authority to make decisions, which is different than some of the other boards that we serve on. We're more or less a liaison for that. So I'm going to move to item number 3. Are you
No, I'm not finished, and I told you I had some
on
other
Metro?
things. I'm done with the Metro, but I had
Okay,
another
I'll
thing.
come to you in a second. We have the next item. I'm going to follow the agenda. The
Thank you
next
for your
item.
opportunity to present on that,
Thank you.
Councilor.
Sorry, Counselor. The next item is the administration communications. I just want to follow
I
that.
said some more open discussion.
We're not
I
on
see.
open
I got
discussion.
it. Okay.
That is number 4. There is no administration communication at this time. I just want to make sure we go through each agenda item. Now, Counselor, if you'd like to do open discussion, the floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you. I just wanted to talk about a little bit about the stoplight issue that came up this week. We had the snowstorm, and I personally witnessed on 14th in Minnesota a stoplight that was totally blinded. And there was a boom truck parked there, a city employee up there with trying to brush it off. So then I started hearing from citizens, and perhaps you did too, people calling and saying, gee, we've got these blinded intersections, how are we going to handle it? So I'm very grateful to Mark Cotter, because I put an email out to him and he responded that they're kind of brushing it off and having to physically remove this right now. But we have this issue as we've gone from the old traditional heated up lights to the LED lights. So just so we're all aware that that's something that could happen again when we have a snow event. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is, just to give this a kind of a heads up, is I would like to schedule a working session with the council and talk about our budgeting priorities within the council. This always seems to come up in May or June when we're having the budget presented to us by the administration, and by then it's too late for us to interject things that we would like to see happening. And so I'm hoping that in this next month we can have a working session. We can just talk about some ideas we'd like to see. Maybe they'll come to fruition, maybe they won't, but at least we have a discussion about some things that are important to us. It might be that nobody thinks anything's important and we're happy with how things are. But I've always thought this would be a neat thing. We've had that discussion in these last 2.5 years since we've been on the council, and so I'm going to be requesting that we do that.
Any other open discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to the audit report, Great Bear Recreation Park audit. Abby and Rich are both here. Thank you for your patience. I know we have several different audits that we'll go through, and we'll take questions after each audit if there are any questions. Welcome, Abby.
Good afternoon, Abby Vandelinati, Internal Auditor. We'll be going through the Great Bear Recreation Park audit report. There we go. The City of Sioux Falls owns Great Bear Recreation Park. An agreement exists between the city and Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated that Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated will operate, manage, plan, and develop Great Bear. The purpose of the audit is to determine Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated's compliance with the management agreement and whether adequate controls are in place to monitor Great Bear operations. The audit focuses on Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated's compliance, city controls over contract monitoring, Great Bear cash receipts and disbursements, and city fixed asset existence. The agreement that was reviewed under the scope of this audit was entered into on April 12, 2013 and expired on April 30th, 2018. Please note, a new contract was signed on March 30th, 2018 and is effective through April 30th, 2023. This new agreement was not reviewed as a part of this audit. The objectives of this audit were to, 1, determine if Great Bear is compliant with the following major requirements of the management agreement. That 1, proper insurance coverage is maintained. 2, required financial reports are provided to the city on a timely basis. And 3, verify operating funds are being used for their stated purpose. Number 2, determine if the city has adequate internal controls in place to ensure Great Bear is compliant with the terms of the management agreement. Number 3, determine if proper internal controls are in place to protect cash receipts and disbursements of Great Bear. And 4, determine if city fixed assets under the control of Great Bear truly exist and are properly safeguarded and reported. Our audit work is listed on the bottom of page 3 for your review. Our results are as follows. Regarding Great Bear contract compliance, we determined that proper insurance coverage is maintained by Great Bear and operating funds are being used for their stated purpose. All required financial reports were provided to the city. However, it is unclear whether or not required reports were submitted to the city within the stated time frames in the contract. The individual from Parks and Recreation who was responsible for overseeing this piece during the scope of the audit retired and is no longer employed by the city. We will go through the opportunity for improvement on page 8 after I go through the rest of the results. Regarding city internal controls over contract compliance, we determined that adequate internal controls are in place to monitor compliance. The opportunity for improvement on page 8 also addresses those results. Regarding cash receipts and disbursements, the following audit findings were noted during the audit. We do have recommendations on pages 7 and 8 to address these. Audit finding 1, due to the relatively small size of staff at Great Bear, practical internal control cannot be achieved as it relates to segregation of duties. We found that the internal manager signs all checks, including checks made out to the general manager. After a discussion with Parks and Recreation Management, it was determined that going forward, there will be board oversight for this process in order to mitigate the risk of inappropriate cash disbursements. Audit recommendation 1 on page 7 addresses this. Audit finding 2, there are no policies and procedures that specifically address the purchasing card program in the operations manual for Great Bear. In discussing the purchasing card program with the general manager, we found that the general manager reviews the monthly purchasing card statement and pays the purchasing card bill. There is no independent party that reviews each monthly purchasing card statement. However, a sample of monthly purchasing card statements is taken during the annual external audit. Audit recommendation 2 on page 8 addresses this. Regarding city fixed assets, based on the testing performed, we determined that the city fixed assets under the control of Great Bear do truly exist and are properly safeguarded and reported. We made the following recommendations that address the above referenced results. Audit recommendation 1, we recommend that a designated member of the Great Bear Board of Directors sign all checks made out to General Manager, Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated. Due to the relatively small size of Great Bear, it is recognized that ideal internal control cannot be achieved as it relates to separation of duties. In light of this, best practices recommend board oversight surrounding cash disbursements. Dan Greider is a general manager of Great Bear, and he responded, all checks made out to Great Bear Recreation Park, Inc., general manager, are now being signed by a designated member of the Great Bear Board of Directors as of 10/1/2018. Audit recommendation 2, we recommend that Great Bear Management, along with the Great Bear Board of Directors, create and document policies and procedures for the purchasing card program. These policies and procedures should be kept current, and the board should ensure that they are consistently followed by staff. We also recommend that an independent review of the monthly purchasing card statement be done as well to ensure oversight over the purchasing card program. Management responded, all purchase card transactions will have receipts matched to statements and will be reviewed by an independent party effective November 14th, 2018. We will have our operations manual updated by November 20th, 2018 to include above and guest service procedures. We identified the following opportunity for improvement to the contract monitoring checklist that Parks and Recreation Management may want to implement in the future. We recommend that the contract monitoring checklist list specific job titles under the responsible party heading. Often, employees change positions or leave the company entirely, which would leave the checklist out of date and unclear as to whose responsibility it is to monitor that piece of the contract checklist. In conclusion, overall, Great Bear Recreation Park Incorporated is in compliance with the major point of the management agreement, and the city has established controls to monitor the compliance of the management agreement. Based upon our audit design and tests, we did not identify any unusual activity and do not have reason to believe Great Bear is out of compliance with the management agreement. The recommendations above, which are based on industry best practices, will provide additional controls designed to protect cash and cash disbursements and mitigate the risk of errors or fraud. We'd like to thank the Parks and Recreation Department as well as Great Bear Management staff for their cooperation and assistance provided during the audit.
Thank you, Abby. Any questions for Abby or Rich on this audit? Counselor Starr.
Yes, thank you. Nice job. My question is that we hired the Great Bear Association to run the facility for us, but there's an operating account that belongs to the city that's managed by the board and their general manager. I think that's how we do it pretty much with most of, whether it's the zoo, the pavilion, and that's why we're concerned how they spend the money. I guess I'm trying to get to that point that it makes sense that if you hired a private business to do something, how they spent their money doesn't matter, but they're technically spending the city's money in that operating account. And that's why we did the review of that, as well as making sure that there are assets that they use of the cities also as part of that. So me more working my way through it than necessarily asking a question. So that makes more sense to me, that why we did what we did. So thank you.
I think that was the easiest question you could have had asked.
I tried to
When
throw
they
a softball
when they
out
answer
there,
their
yeah.
own question, it makes it easy. Any other questions, Counselor Kiley?
Thank you very much. And I'm fine with the recommendation under number 1, because I was, as you recall, addressed concern or recommendation that we have at least 2 people sign off on checks that are made out to the manager. Best practices would dictate that, but with my understanding is we're talking about a group of 3 here, so that is difficult to do. But having a board member sign those checks and be sure that everything's accounted for in terms of receipts and things of that nature, and everything's appropriate, I'm very fine with that. So,
Correct.
Good job. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Any, Counselor Neitzer?
Yeah, the other reason I think it's important is they're managing our facility, which means there's liability, of course, if they don't run it properly, that we could be exposed to if people are injured. And then, of course, and the parks does some things, but they also use our equipment. A lot of that stuff is stuff that we own, that they maintain it properly, and that it's obviously in good working order, and that it will last as long as it should. So there's a number of things in which they're entrusted to essentially manage our assets. So.
Thank you. One piece I'll just mention, I saw it on Facebook this weekend that with all the cold temperature and the snow they've been making, they've put that snowcat groomer to great use, and seeing the narrative behind the operator of the snowcat groomer and how they appreciate having that equipment was big to their facility and their operation. So I thought that was kind of fun to see some of those pictures, and they took them kind of in an artsy way, and it was quite impressive. So let's move to the next one for fraud risk assessment.
Rich Oaksel, Internal Audit. The city has a fraud policy which was adopted by resolution by the City Council, I believe in around 2013 or so. And in that policy, it required at least every 5 years to do a fraud risk assessment. So this was overdue slightly, but we got it done this year. So the definition of fraud in this policy is defined as dishonest activity or other intentional misconduct causing actual or potential financial loss or financial or reputational loss to the city. Examples would be embezzlement, theft of any asset, or authorizing or receiving compensation for hours not actually worked. There's a lot of ways that fraud can happen. There's a professional association called the ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. They classified fraud into 3 broad categories. First one being asset misappropriation, stealing, if you want to call it that. The second one was financial statement fraud, typically done to inflate the stock price for financial gain. The third one is just simply corruption. That would be bribery, that sort of thing. They do an annual survey of businesses and organizations in all sorts of categories, whether it's government or not-for-profit or for-profit businesses, and they gather a lot of information on how much fraud is happening and what kinds of fraud are happening. They estimate that organizations globally, this is globally, lose about 5% of their total revenue to fraud, and that's based on the surveys that they do. The median loss for all organizations, according to ACFE, was $150,000. Medium duration of frauds was 18 months, so those are interesting statistics there, and there's some more there on page 2. I'm not going to go through all those. Let's look at page 3 there. The objectives were to identify fraud cases that the city as an organization has experienced. Number 2, to identify city assets, situations or processes that have high or moderate inherent fraud risk. Number 3, identify the key controls or control activities related to fraud prevention and detection. 4, research a list of leading practices related to fraud prevention and detection and assess whether the city uses those practices. And number 5, identify action steps. On page 3 there, as far as fraud cases cities experienced, as far as corruption, I'm definitely aware of one that happened about 20 years ago with a bid rigging situation. Had to do with the contract for relining water lines, something the city did on a regular basis, and there was a case of a out-of-state contractor approaching a local contractor to do some bid rigging. That resulted in the local contractor going to the city administration and reporting what had happened, and that eventually that resulted in a law enforcement action on the out-of-state contractor for trying to rig the bids there. As far as asset misappropriation, we've had 2 cases at the landfill. About the mid-90s, we had a case of what's called cash skimming, where the employee was taking the cash before it went in the cash register, simply pocketing the cash. Is a very simple fraud scheme. And then again, about 2001, 2002, exact same thing happened with a different employee, but the same location at the landfill. Since then, there's been a significant improvement in the internal controls at landfill. We've done internal audits out there to make sure that that isn't happening. Again, municipal golf course, situation with the management company that managed the golf course. They had an employee that was skimming cash at one of the golf courses. That was in the 1990s. We've had some isolated cases of improper use of what's called the P cards, the purchasing cards that city employees have to make small purchases. Right now, we've just started a P card audit. Abby has just started that in the last couple of weeks. That's on the annual audit plan. And then this year, or I should say, actually 2018, last year now, we're into 2019 now. In April of 2018, our city finance department was the victim of a ACH, fraud scam. ACH is automated clearinghouse, and I give some details there on page 4 of what happened. The bottom of page 4, the city assets and situations and processes with what we consider moderate to high inherent risk would be cash or cash equivalents. Investments, page 5 there. Payroll, that's always an area of moderate risk due to the possibility of override and just simply the volume of funds that are processed. Purchasing cards, which we just mentioned. Grant funding. Capital assets, especially if they are portable and useful to conversion for private use. Some of the capital assets could be considered at moderate risk of fraud or misappropriation. And the last one is entities managing city facilities. We just had the audit report on Great Bear, and there's numerous cases where we have city facilities that are being managed by third parties, and they're considered to have at least a moderate risk because they're outside of the internal control framework of the city. They're not city employees, but they're managing city assets and city facilities. The one thing that we identified as a high fraud risk would be cyber threats. Computer security it's a constantly evolving field. Fraudsters always seem to be one step ahead of the good guys. In March of last year, the city of Atlanta was the victim of a massive cyber attack, and it shut down the city for days. It cost them a lot of money. City officials were forced to use paper documents to get some city work done due to the severity of the attack. So that's something that can be extremely cost a lot of time and money for a city if they're a victim of a cyber attack. Overall, based on the ACFE surveys and our experience as internal auditors, would say that the city is probably at most risk for victimization by corruption or misappropriation of assets, not so much for the financial statement manipulation. City managers don't have a financial incentive to cook the books, so to speak, as they would in the corporate setting. That is the least common form of fraud, according to the ACFE, the financial statement manipulation. Additionally, external audits are performed every year on the financial statements. Key control activities we identified on page 5 and 6 there were the bank reconciliations, very important. The master vendor file, that's the list of all the companies that are allowed to do business with the city, where we would pay them for services or goods received. That's a critical control that has to be locked down very tightly. Likewise, the personnel master file, that's the list of all the city employees and their authorized pay. Any changes to that personnel master file should be severely limited. Segregation of duties is a control concept, kind of what we call checks and balances. No one employee should have control over 2 or more phases of a transaction or an operation, if at all possible. Sometimes, like in the case of Great Bear, you can't get that segregation of duties because you just don't have enough people, but certainly in the city, we can get segregation of duties. And lastly is just the idea of a control environment, and that's sometimes called the corporate culture, or tone at the top. That's the management's philosophy and operating style, and that kind of trickles down to employees. It involves the promotion of a positive workplace environment and that sort of thing. So that's control environment. That's very key. Leading anti-fraud practices. I listed 14 of those on page 6 and 7. I'm not going to go through those in detail unless you would like me to mention those, but those were leading practices, and then I gave a status of where we're at with the city with those 14 leading practices. Action steps going forward on page 7 and 8. Based upon our fraud risk assessment, we identified a few isolated cases where the city could be receiving revenue in the form of checks. We call them orphan checks, things that weren't invoiced, so that if they were misappropriated, nobody would necessarily know because they weren't expecting those. They just kind of drop out of the sky. There's a few isolated cases of that. Not very many. We'll follow up on that. Number two, we'll check the level of the employee dishonesty insurance coverage to see if that could and should be increased from the current level. We identified some opportunities for more continuous auditing, payroll, procurement, accounts payable activities. We'll be working on that as follow-up. We have the P-card audit just started. We had training for employees in fraud prevention and detection. We'll recommend that that continues. Eide Bailey, our external auditors, has a forensic division, and they have experts in this, and they have provided training to the mid-management group and also to the our finance employees. And information technology, our understanding is they'll be conducting training for city employees in 2019 specific to what are known as phishing scams. And if you don't know what that is, at the bottom of page 8, I describe what a phishing scam is. The last thing there, at number 8 there, a death audit. That is something that is done on the pension recipients to make sure that everybody that's receiving a benefit in the pension system is still alive, basically. There's been, I know there are 2 cases. One was in the city of Philadelphia, another one city of Atlanta, where the basically dead people were getting checks for pensions. They sometimes the relatives know, they have control of the checking account. They simply don't let the city know that the relative has died, and they keep spending the money, that sort of thing. And you can hire a company to do a database check and make sure that your list of pension recipients appear to be still alive. They check the Social Security website. There's other databases that they check. Last time we did it was around 2002. It cost us about $500, if I recall correctly. So it's a very simple thing to do. It's probably something we should do on a regular basis, every, say 3 to 5 years, something like that. So in conclusion, I would say that we concluded that the city is robust in developing, implementing, and monitoring anti-fraud controls and activities. Any large and complex organization like the city is going to be at risk. You simply can never eliminate all the risks. But we can certainly do our best to protect city assets from misappropriation or that sort of thing. So do you have any questions for me at this moment?
Any questions? Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Rich. The amounts you were talking about like years ago, I kind of remember something about it, but those landfill cases where there were funds missing, what kind of amounts were those?
I happen to be involved with the one in 2001. I actually worked on that when I was in finance as an auditor, and we came up with a number of about $19,500, and that was over about 2 years. So the person that was, the employee was called in for questioning by the police department, and they confessed immediately, so it never went to trial, but it went to the judge. And my supervisor went there in front of the judge, and we explained how we came up with the number. And so he ordered a restitution for $19,500 to be paid at some point over 8 years. And it was paid back to the city. So we got our money back. The other case, I think from 1996, I don't think there was ever a number came up with. They just had a tip, and I think risk management followed up on a tip and did some videotaping, and they terminated the employee.
Both were like one-person operation type of deals?
Yeah, it was a one-person operation. At the time, I remember in 2001, it was simply basically a shack, and with one employee and a cash register, and it was what we call the public gate. So you came on with your pickup full of rubble or whatever, and the employee would come out and say, "What do you have?" And he'd say, "Well, that's $10. You want a receipt?" And most people would say no, and so he'd take the $10 and go back to the shack, and they would never go in the cash register.
Right.
People would be on their way, and we got a tip. A person, a citizen who had an employee, who had a relative in finance, said, "It's kind of strange, that they aren't big on receipts out there." And so my supervisor and I went out there and did an unannounced cash count, and then we had our suspicions, so we started doing some research, and we came up with it looked like some cash was missing.
Right.
So then that's when we got the police department involved. So, my supervisor thought it could have been $100,000, but we just couldn't prove that. I mean, cash skimming, there's no record because it never goes in the cash register. So,
Right. One other question, if I could here. How long does it take? I think I read on your other one to do the audit for Great Bear took a couple of weeks type of thing. How long does it take to do this fraud risk assessment, everything here? Did I miss the timeline there? Or?
Well, it was, a lot of our work was interviewing each of the directors. So I think we did a series of 11 interviews with the directors and their management team. We reviewed the fraud risk assessments we did in the past. Did some research. So it doesn't take that much time. Probably less than a typical audit. Probably a couple months of work. We can do it more often than every 5 years. Now, I can tell you when we do individual audits, like the P-card audit, part of our process is to do a risk assessment just in general, and then when we consider fraud risks, when we're doing P-cards or whatever we're doing, like, we kind of brainstorm and we ask management, we do due diligence that way on specific audits as well. But this was for the city as an organization.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks you. And just a quick shout out, I want to thank both you and Abby for your efforts in this department on behalf of our city. I know it's been a unusual, maybe challenging time or unusual year to say the least, and thanks for your efforts and hanging in there.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this topic? Councilor Staley?
And I would agree or echo that, Rich. I appreciate you coming back. I've always felt like you were a pretty solid, get to it kind of guy. Two questions about this fraud issue. When we had that $120,000 oversight at the landfill on Dan's garbage, what does that fall into?
Oh, well, we were asked to do an audit of that, and that had to do with the accounts receivable process, like how the garbage companies could accumulate that much of an accounts receivable. So they were, they would be charged, I think, a monthly fee when they would come in. That the trucks are weighed. That's how they do it. They know how much the trucks are empty, and then they weigh them when they come in, and so they can tell the difference between the weight and what the empty weight was. They assess them. They were allowed to accumulate a large amount of money, and so so I think immediately after that happened, there was a change in policy that we will not allow garbage haulers to. They have to pay their bill. They can't just keep.
Right, but I thought this was going on over a period of years. He was sick, and then I didn't think this
I think
just was a short term.
Our audit focused on, they immediately made changes. So then we waited, I don't know, 9 months or whatever, and then we looked at the city as a whole. We looked at the accounts receivable, like how they're handled at the health department and all the departments, and to see if if this was going on in other departments, and also to see if the new procedures were working as we expected them to.
So the name on that, that isn't called fraud, that's called.
No, that's not fraud.
That's called just lack of oversight.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it. I wouldn't call that fraud. I don't think there was any intention to to steal funds, at least on the part of city employees. I think it was a case of letting a company that was maybe a little shaky financially accumulate too large a balance, and
So maybe, okay, then the other thing is the Phillips to the Falls event that actually kicked this whole department off. Had that proceeded onward, what would that be considered? If that had been allowed, because I think there was some talk about maybe seeking some legal action about that.
Yeah, I know the city council, I think, went back and forth. There were some that wanted to pursue legal action, others didn't. And I think the compromise was to have the state do the audit. I don't think there was ever any intention for financial gain for any individual. So
what's that misappropriation of funds, though, in a way, right? When you're shifting things around?
I don't think you would call it misappropriation of funds. I think it was just a case of exceeding spending authority. So whatever you want to.
But it seemed like there were going to be some legal ramifications to the action that was taken.
Yeah, I believe the thought was that it violated the city charter, for one thing, and perhaps state law. But I I don't know, I don't think the city council ever asked the state's attorney to pursue that, and the state, as far as I know, the state's attorney never did pursue
No,
that.
I think it was dropped.
I think it was dropped,
It was
but I
dropped,
don't know the details of that, and
okay.
I'd hesitate to call that fraud, but I would certainly say that, yeah, you were correct, that's why we have an internal audit division, is because of that was kind of the catalyst for that happening, yeah.
And the last thing, you mentioned the master vendor list is always locked down tightly. How would that, who we're doing business with, how does that affect a fraud possibility?
Well, you can, there are schemes where you can create a fictitious vendor, so to speak. I'm aware of a case at the 3M plant in Brookings where I think it was the IT director set up a company. You know, he made up a company and he got a DBA name, I assume with the state, and so he created this company on paper, and so he would simply arrange for invoices to show up at the 3M plant, and he would approve these invoices for payment, and then the payments would be mailed or electronically transferred to his bank account that he set up for, you know, company. He'd make up a name like, you know, ABC Consulting, and it was for some, you know, some computer services. So he had money in the budget, and nobody questioned what they were doing, and I think it was a $6 or $7 million fraud that he had arranged by simply setting up a fictitious company. And nobody in accounts payable or finance had done maybe due diligence, like, does this company actually exist? And that sort of thing. So when somebody wants to do business with the city and they're not on the vendor, you know, master vendor file, they have to fill out a form, and then that would be the job of the city. Say, does this company actually exist? Do they have a, you know, the IRS forms that, you know, do they appear to be legitimate? So it's easy to set up a phony company and bill an organization.
But I would think the organization would be able to say services not received.
Yeah, but this guy, apparently he was in a position as the IT director that he would, you know, he approved these invoices. He would just say, and the finance department apparently cut a check then because he had approved the invoice. Nobody had done any due diligence on, like, what services are we getting and who is this vendor? Do they actually exist? And so.
And that also would be helped out when you're talking about having more than 2 people looking at an expenditure, right? You're saying, as far as you said, signing checks off, but scrutinizing.
Yeah, you want to have some segregation of duties. That's kind of a general concept in general, that you don't allow one person to have control of a whole process without somebody else looking over their shoulder, so to speak.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair, just
Go ahead,
a quick
Counselor.
one. We're glad to have you back, let's put it that way. And so, but my question is this: you've done it from both sides. You've done it from the internal audit type function from the finance office, and were able to find a lot of fraud and make sure that things were done correctly. When we brought it or when the council brought the internal audit function to the council side of it, do you see the advantage of that being separate and being a function of the council and under the council?
I do. I'd say it creates independence, certainly allows the auditors to have some fearlessness about what they do. They don't have to worry about having their reports censored by the administration if they didn't like, you know, say, or being told, don't do that audit, we don't want you looking at that, you know, have that independence. So.
And having access to everything, probably.
Yeah, and having access to everything that we need to look at, yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
One quick question I have for you, as we talk about the cash handling and the issue that was at the landfill, do we, not me, you guys, look at the other cash handling such as pools, health, parking, all of those that receive cash?
Yeah, right before I retired in 2016, that was one of my last audits, we kind of looked at the citywide cash handling.
Okay.
And there's a lot of places, you know, we have these school-based health clinics, we have the swimming pools, we have the community centers, a lot of places where the utility billing office.
Right.
And so we looked at all those places where we receive cash, you know, currency, credit cards, that sort of thing.
Right, okay. Sounds good, thank you. Councilor Staley, did you have another question? Okay, we'll move to the next one then, citywide risk assessment.
Okay, similar, we're required to do on a regular basis, do just overall risk assessment. Fraud is kind of a subcategory of the risk. And this also involved a lot of meeting with city directors and their management teams, reviewing previous risk assessments that we had done. And I'd like to look at page 4 there. We're trying to identify some of the biggest current risks that we have. And the consensus of the city management was the following on page 4 there, was maintaining the expected level of service in a continually growing and expanding city. Includes infrastructure, maintaining public safety services, culture and recreational services and amenities. That is a continual challenge. Tax revenue growth, particularly in sales tax, which has been less than the historical rates of growth. Now we hope with the court decision on internet sales that will help a lot. And then the third one was cyber threats, which we just had mentioned in the previous report. Data security, that's a big current risk. Some of the other risks that were mentioned, those bullet points there, increase in lawsuits where the city is a defendant, that has definitely increased in the last 5 years. Rising crime rate in general, transit system funding, the council is quite aware of that challenge. Natural disasters such as emerald ash spore infestation and flooding and that sort of thing. Supply of affordable housing not keeping up with the need. Potential for political demonstrations that could disrupt traffic and strain law enforcement resources. Fraud in general, we just mentioned that. Management turnover as key managers retire. Future risks, we inquired about what do you see that's maybe on the horizon but not quite here yet, say in the next 5 to 10 years, bottom of page 4 going on page 5. Changes in technology resulting in now unforeseen challenges and risks. We don't know what that's going to hold for us. Example would be what they call smart cities. Another thing was ensuring that our city workforce is educated and trained for the technology that they will be required to use in their jobs. Climate change, we could see more severe weather events such as blizzards, torrential rains. It seems like the 100-year rains are now every 5 years or more often. Active shooter events, succession planning as long tenured employees retire. And just simply, we have to compete for in the labor pool for our city employees. So just recruitment and retention of city employees. The MOUs, what we call the major organization units with the greatest inherent risks. So we looked at the last one that we did, our last risk assessment in 2015, and we identified 4 that we put into the high risk. They were public works, police, health, and affordable housing. In 2018, we would maintain that public works, police, and health would still be at the highest inherent risk. Affordable housing would drop off. Affordable housing made it on that list because at that time they had a lot of management turnover. They had not had a audit done by us, and I don't think we'd ever done an audit of affordable housing, and a couple other factors. Those were no longer the case in 2018, so they were no longer in that greatest inherent risk. I can tell you that public works, police, and health have had numerous internal audits over the last 10 years, so they do get quite a bit of scrutiny by internal auditors. And the reason that public works, police, and health are considered in that high inherent risk is they have large departments, they have complex operations, they have their impact of operations on the health and safety of the residents is very high. They have the interest of the public. They certainly have the interest of the city council and the media and department operations. These departments are subject to federal and state regulations, all 3 of these. And so they have all those types of risks they have to mitigate, such as financial, hazard risks, operational risks, compliance risks. And so those would be the top three. Top of page 6 there, the city business processes and contracts and agreements with the greatest inherent risk in our opinion. We would identify payroll, including the pension payroll, certainly the accounts payable process, and thirdly, the purchasing and procurement to include P-cart use. And all of those have been subject to internal audits. We identified 6 contracts or agreements having the highest internal inherent risk due to the public visibility, interest, and volume of city dollars expended. And as I said, these agreements are with organizations to manage city facilities. They're outside the internal control framework of the city. They're not city employees. So number 1 was that SMG agreement for the Denny Sanford Premier Event Center, Convention Center, Arena, Stadium, and Orpheum Theater. It's all one agreement with SMG. There's a separate agreement with Ovations, who provide the food and beverage service for these entertainment venues. So if we did an audit, we would probably include that Ovations, probably look at that Ovations contract as well. Number 2 is the first transit agreement to manage the Sioux Area Metro. Number 3, the Washington Pavilion Management Agreement for the Pavilion. Number 4, landscapes unlimited for the 3 public golf courses. Number 5, Great Bear, we just had that audit to present it to you. And number 6 is the Zoological Society and to manage the Great Plains Zoo and Delbridge Museum. And Abby is just wrapping up that audit. That will be presented probably at the next audit committee meeting. She'll have her what we call our exit conference with the zoo management here in the next couple of weeks. We did note during our assessment the city has been moving in the direction of more centralization and formality in regard to the management of risk in general. For example, the police department is now performing a regular risk assessment of city facilities from a safety and security perspective. In 2018, a new position called safety coordinator was approved and has been filled, I think in October with an employee. And that's located in the HR departments. And then, as I said, the City Council approved a fraud control policy in 2012. We would recommend a continuing work in this direction. Enterprise risk management is the buzzword that's used in the corporate world. It's not very common in local government to hear those terms, enterprise risk management or ERM. But the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, recommends that local governments adopt what's called the COSO framework for internal control. So we would recommend that maybe we do some work on that to see maybe if that would be suitable for the city and adopt it as policy by resolution to have to use that internal control framework going forward. We also did some work to just identify audits for the 2019 annual audit plan, which you have already approved that annual audit plan, so I won't spend much time on that. Recommendations, bottom of page 7. We mentioned that we develop maybe go in the direction of having a formal risk management framework, perhaps adopting that COSO framework. And getting various parties involved, such as internal audit, the city risk manager, the city safety coordinator, finance director, city attorney, that sort of thing. Number 2, it was recommended that we call the executive director of the South Dakota Public Assurance Alliance to make a presentation on the sort of claims that the Public Assurance Alliance is seeing from South Dakota municipalities. So we'll follow up with the director to see if we can arrange for a presentation either at the audit committee or maybe even at an informational meeting. And number 3, we'll just continue to review the current audit universe and update that. That audit universe is simply a list of all the city departments and contracts and processes that would be subject to audit by internal audit. So we just want to make sure that we have everything current in that audit universe, and we'll present that to the next at the next audit committee meeting. So I would say that we've taken great strides to centralize and formalize the identification and management of citywide risk, and that we just keep doing what we're doing and maybe even make it just a little better. Now, we did, Abby, do you want to put up this on the screen real quick? I went over this in more detail with the audit committee, and I was going to spend a lot of time today on this, but we updated this list. We came up with this list, I think, in 2015, and then when we were interviewing city management, we had them look at it and make suggestions for an update to that. So in that, we had the one column we described what the risk was. In the middle column, how it was mitigated or controlled, and then the third column was, has this area been audited? Either we have done the audit, external audit looks at this, or perhaps the department goes through the accreditation process, such as the fire department and the park department. They go through a accreditation process, and then they have to do a re-accreditation. So that kind of the detailed information is there on that report. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take your questions either on this or the risk assessment report.
Any questions on this? Councilor Staley?
Rich, would you reconsider and come back full-time?
No.
That was a pretty
You have the
solid no.
historical knowledge that is so important.
But I
Thank
enjoy
you.
retirement, though.
Yeah, well, you can never lose that workforce purpose that
Yeah.
keeps you.
That is a risk, though, that we have a lot of long-tenured employees that have left or are leaving soon, and then it's a case of, all the information and between their ears walks out the door.
Exactly, yes, that's. So anyway, let me, just a few things. When you're talking about number 3, the internal audit shall continue to review, it's on page 8, the current audit universe and update it, and a list of all the city divisions, contracts and agreements and processes. Would you consider this would be open to the public? I mean, all the things you're reviewing, these are things that the public has access to, is that correct? Or, I mean, anything
Well, the audit universe would be just everything that we could be subject to audit. So, I mean, usually it isn't something that cities typically have a public meeting about. Usually it's the auditors and the city council and the audit committee usually. What were you suggesting, Councilor?
Well, I guess when you were talking about this universe and that a list of all the city divisions, apparently what the audit universe is a list of all city divisions. So it's not like this is all going to be put into some kind of a universe file.
Well, yeah, we'd have some sort of document where we list certainly all the city MOUs, which we were aware of. I was thinking of, we have, say, we give money to downtown Sioux Falls. That would be, for a business improvement district. We'd certainly want to have that sort of thing on our audit universe that we don't forget about that. There's some agreements out there that sometimes, we were just talking about this with one of our city directors. He said there was an agreement with some township, and the city employee that was aware of this agreement with the township retired or left, and all of a sudden the township said, City of Sioux Falls, you owe us money. And city staff was like, we didn't even know about this agreement. So we want to try to capture all those situations where we have maybe obligations to townships, or we have maybe the city gives money to an organization that's not the pavilion or the zoo, but they might get city funding. So we want to make sure we have that list current. And then a question of, do we need to audit this entity? Do they get a subsidy of, even if it's, $50,000 or something like that? So we want to make sure that we have everything captured, and then we kind of like, okay, do we need to audit this, or we don't need to audit this?
Yes.
Because the audit universe, you come up with your audit universe, and maybe in a given year you might get around to 5% of it, because it's just so huge.
But you're right, I think I'm aware of that township issue, and you know what I'm saying to people now, Rich? I always say to people, get it written down.
Yeah.
Get it documented, get an email on it, because people change, they come and go, and then.
People change, and sometimes the person that knew about it is gone, and I can recall doing an audit of the Wayne Township agreement that we had to provide fire services, because they had eliminated their volunteer fire department, so there was an agreement for the city to provide that, and there was a financial arrangement. Well, the people that were most familiar with that, the fire chief and the township board person, had retired, And then the new people came on board and they had questions about how it was operating. I think it was more of a handshake deal sometimes.
Yes.
So we want to make sure that we're aware of these situations where we might possibly be on the hook, especially financially, or if we're subsidizing somebody, what kind of audit coverage do they have? Do they have an external audit done, or do we need to do the audit, or what are the risks? So.
And then on page 6, if I may, the ERM, Enterprise Risk Management, and it says that it's recommends a best practice that state governments, that make sure, reasonable assurance that they're achieving their operational reporting and compliance objectives. And, one thing that I think we've grown so much, and we're continuing to grow in our city, our government has grown, our employees, the departments are growing. We are a part-time body here that's overseeing the end result of signing the contracts, approving the projects. And so, to me, we had a fraud thing, I keep bringing it up, but the Municipal League last fall had this fraud presentation. And they talked about fraud and, what was that community I've referenced?
Dixon, Illinois.
Yeah, and they said one of the greatest environments for fraud is when we have friendly relationships with the people we're overseeing. It's so hard to ask them those tough questions. And I think our department heads have immense power in our city, the immense authority. And I ask questions, and I think sometimes people think I'm picking on a department head, and I'm not. I'm only asking the question that I think we need to be asking. And a smaller municipality like Brandon, we talked with them a few weeks ago. I was saying, if you have a, $50,000 contract, do you talk about it? They said, absolutely. Smaller municipalities do that. So when you're talking about this, it sounds to me like this would be giving a little more oversight into what is being done within a department, because we're limited as to how much we can peer into that and kind of take it apart. Yeah. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, what I would recommend probably is that perhaps the city council would adopt by resolution, we're going to say that we want the city to use the COSO integrated framework for internal control, and it has a lot of practical information in COSO, like, okay, this is what we expect from directors, this is what we expect from our internal auditors, and this is what we expect from our city employees. And part of that involves ethics training. I've just talked to Greg Neitsert about that, and the fraud hotline and that sort of thing. Sometimes it's good to make it policy, make it, okay, we will have internal control, and it will be an integrated framework, and we will hold people accountable, and people will understand their responsibilities. And so, but like you said, we are a large and complex organization. We keep getting more large and more complex, and more money. We have to have good controls in place, and we have to monitor those controls. So.
Sounds good, thank you. We have one more audit report, so let's move to that one because we have another presentation after that. So in the interest of time and allowing public input, we will move to the financial condition analysis.
Okay. We've done a financial condition analysis. I think I've done 2 or 3 in the past years during my time as internal audit manager. I'm just going to talk about 4 of the things that we looked at. I looked at, I think, 10 different ratios or indicators. And for some of them, I also compared Sioux Falls to 10 comparison cities, which are listed there on page 3 at the top, or benchmark cities, if you would. We use the CAFRs for a 5-year period, 2013 to 2017. And we use the bar graphs to just make, for those of you who are visual learners, just make it a little easier. I'm just going to focus on 4 out of those 10. Number 1 is the short-term liquidity on page 3. That means, do you have cash to pay for your immediate debts? In other words, what's your short-term liquidity? So I looked at the current assets divided by the current liabilities. Current liabilities, things you need to pay within 1 year. Current assets are cash, net receivables, those things that can be either cash or can become cash very quickly. So it's not your fixed assets, it's your current assets like that. You want your ratio to be above 1.0, meaning you want your assets to be greater than your liabilities. If it's less than that, that means you're broke. if your ratio is like, say, 0.75, that means you owe more than you have, especially with cash. So our short-term liquidity in the government activities was very good. It was anywhere from about 7.0 to close to 10.0. So that was very, very good. No warning trends there. Current assets far exceed the current liabilities. So we can meet our short-term obligations as they come due. The second one I was going to look at on page 4 and 5, they're at the change in total net position. Total net position is like the city's net worth. Okay, so you take current assets, subtract your liabilities. What do you have left? That's your net position. And if you had a declining net position in a city from year to year, that might be an indication of fiscal stress, like the city is not doing well. So at the top of page 5 there's the bar graph, and you can see like a steady rise in our total net position, so that is good. So we're not undergoing fiscal stress based upon this ratio. And I just want to point out that no one ratio is the golden one that that you use to evaluate your city's financial condition. I picked 10, and there's probably 20 or 30 that you could use, and each of those tells you maybe a slightly different story. Number 3 was a debt per capita on page 7 and 8. And this is one that we compared to our 10 benchmark cities. So we looked at, okay, just take all the outstanding debt. What is that number, and divide that by your population of your city, and you come up with a number. And for the city, we were, I think in 2015, it was under 2,000, and then it was up to close to about $2,400, kind of in that range. And I have a footnote at the bottom of page 8 there. Standard & Poor, the financial services company that issues credit ratings, they would rate debt per capita. If it's under 1,000, they would say that's low. Moderate would be that 1,000 to 2,500. So we were in that moderate category. The benchmark cities, when we averaged the benchmark cities, they were closer to about $3,500. So they would be in that high category. The goal, generally speaking, is not to have no debt, because that would indicate you're probably not putting any money into your streets and your utilities. You're probably going to have some debt, but you just probably don't want to get into that high category. It affects your credit rating, puts you could put you under financial stress. So we didn't see any warning trend in that debt per capita. And the last one I like to look at is simply city employees per 1,000 residents on page 8 and 9. Personnel costs are our major expense for our operating budget, as you can imagine. If you have an increase in employees per capita, it could suggest that your payroll costs are rising faster than your revenue, or that you're becoming more labor intensive, or that your personnel productivity is declining. So we compared it to the benchmark cities there. Benchmark cities averaged close to 8 city employees per 1,000 residents. We were at 7, or between 6.7 and 7, and the trend is slightly declining, and that was part of the stress or the risk that the city directors were reporting. Trying to come up with, trying to maintain city services with a rapidly growing city. And certainly, its FTEs are difficult to get, full-time equivalents, and so that can be something that has to be managed carefully. We didn't see any warning trend on this measure. We've been fairly steady, and we are lower than the average of the benchmark cities. So, in conclusion, I could say that based on the financial ratios and measures that we used, we did not see any warning trends for 2013 through 2017. We consider the city in a good financial position to weather economic downturns and emergency situations based upon the net position ratio, the unreserved fund balance, in other words, the rainy day fund that you're well aware of. And we also concluded the city outperforms the average of the benchmark cities for the ones that we looked at, that we were doing better than those 10 cities. Do you have any questions?
Any questions on this item? Councilor Staley.
Now, this debt that you figured in, was that, I'm assuming that was after we paid off some of our debt last year?
Well,
Or,
we
I
didn't
mean-
look at 2018 because of that, we were looking at 2017 going back to 2013. So
So
whatever.
you don't know what 2018,
No, I don't have those numbers. Our CAFR's not done yet. So what we simply looked at in the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, early in that CAFR, you can find the outstanding debt, like the total debt for the city, and then it's divided by the number of citizens.
Right.
And you can come up with that number. So that now, obviously, if we borrow money for the water reclamation plant, we'll kind of have to see how the trending goes on that. But from 2013 to 2017, the outstanding debt had been going down slightly each
well,
year.
and you read my mind, because I believe at some point, we were like 300, let's just say $350 million in debt. I'm just throwing that out years ago.
Yeah.
So now, at the end of 5 years, if we've taken out this $260 million total for this waste treatment project, in addition to our other debt, that could change things.
It could change things, yeah, because if you take on more debt and the city doesn't increase tremendously, yeah, that number could go, that ratio could go up, that number, yeah.
So
But
this
it's something you want to-
217 has the administration building in it.
I would think so, yeah, because that was completed in 2017, I believe, yeah.
And the parking ramp.
Yeah, I would think that would
Probably.
be in the 2017 numbers, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we just use the numbers that were in the CAFR, and those are, generally speaking, audited numbers.
And with those numbers, we'll also take into account all the debt that we've paid off over that year, because I know there's been some bonds that have also been retired.
Yeah,
That will offset
Yeah,
the new debt that's taken on.
yeah. So we retire old debt and we take on new debt. That's
Right.
kind of the ebb and flow.
The revolving door, so to speak.
Yeah.
Any other questions on this item? Thank you so much. Appreciate you guys being here and for giving us the updates on all of these audit reports, and look forward to the audits coming in the future. The next item is the audit ordinance report. Counselor Neitzer, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, and appreciate you bearing with me. I will try to be as succinct as possible, but it's important stuff. We've been discussing the internal audit for some time now, and I'm happy to provide you the proposed ordinance that will no doubt address the challenges that we've identified. But more importantly, I think you'll find today that today is a package that transforms our audit function in many subtle yet significant ways. This past September, we had a great discussion about internal audit, and while those discussions began informally much earlier and have continued since, I think it's safe to say that the council recognizes the challenges that the office faced, but we reaffirmed the commitment to the essential function of audit. We all know that these challenges had to be addressed sooner than later in a comprehensive manner that sets the right conditions for bringing our audit staff back up to full strength. To this end, the proposed ordinance clearly defines the role of audit and establishes an unambiguous organizational structure. Both of these components work in concert to best define the expectations, the scope of work, and the ground rules for audit in relation to the council, the administration, and to the general public. There's a lot in the proposed ordinance, but I want to say up front that much can be viewed as simply a consolidation of previously adopted standards and policies. Importantly, this consolidation puts so many of the essential aspects of audit in one easy-to-find place, and this is good for many obvious reasons. So let's talk about some of the key features. Interestingly, the current audit ordinance does not address what has become our Office of Internal Audit. It focused exclusively on the Audit Committee. A simple fix to this was a name change from Audit Committee to Internal Audit, and you'll see why shortly. The proposed ordinance includes a preamble, which is a clear statement of purpose identifying why we have and need this important function. The proposed ordinance gives appointment authority of outside members of the Audit Committee and the internal audit staff back to the full council. I want to point out that you'll find a common theme throughout the ordinance. This function is squarely a responsibility of the council, but the council through this ordinance has also included the mechanisms to smartly ensure what I would call professional independence of the audit function. Accordingly, the Audit Committee and the Office of Internal Audit each receive due attention. The committee is now given clear responsibilities in executing the audit function as well as clear obligations to the City Council. The same goes for the Office of Internal Audit. but steps have been taken to define the roles and responsibilities of all involved. By this, I'm referring primarily to reporting and performance management, which I'm going to discuss later. Additionally, this proposed ordinance provides the office the authority to do what they're tasked with. And before I get into the ordinance itself, I want to briefly explain how we got here. Getting to where we are now has no doubt been a laborious process, but a fruitful and productive one that will yield benefits for years to come. You'll remember in September, I presented you one simple question: what do we want from audit? The productive discussions we had about it then served as a springboard to many other equally productive discussions with the rest of you, the audit committee, staff throughout the city, and among a working subgroup focusing on addressing the personnel component to our challenges. We closely examined the foundational documents associated with audit in order to determine the best path forward. This included the current ordinance, audit professional standards, and the audit charter. As a result, from all of this came the proposed ordinance that is before you. And so now you should have a copy of the proposed ordinance, and I'm just going to go through real quick at a high level what each piece does. So the first part, the new section is new. Again, it's a preamble that nicely captures what we as a council expect the people of Sioux Falls to get out of the audit function, why it's so important, and what it, in broad terms, audit does. I want to again emphasize that this captures much of the feedback I've heard from you and others, and that essentially provides a statement of purpose. The section that follow make detailed refinements to the existing ordinance. We'll go through them section by section. While we are doing that, bear in mind what I mentioned before. There's now a clear distinction between the audit committee and the Office of Internal Audit. The important thing here is it sets forth very clearly why as a council we believe we need an audit function, and it gives our auditors a clear sense of purpose and a mission. It also clearly indicates our support for that mission. There's essentially no change in the section 32015 other than the header, which now includes audit committee as a way of distinguishing it from the Office of Internal Audit. Since the ordinance will now contain ordinance related to both the Office of Internal Audit and the audit committee, we need to clearly state this is a creation of the committee specifically in the catch head. Section 32016. The requirement for one member to be a fiscal committee member is being struck simply because it is somewhat superfluous. Going forward, this change will not limit membership, and of course, fiscal committee members can still be appointed. No one was really even aware of this requirement, to my knowledge, when they made appointments to the audit committee. And we also added a clause stating that citizen members must be registered voters of the city, which is consistent with what other boards' ordinance say. 32017, appointment, and 32018, terms, filing of vacancies. So I'm going to cover them together. In a nutshell, it returns appointment authority for outside members back to the full council. And I want to make that very clear. Right now, the audit chair simply can appoint a member and make the selection, and then the council approves it. This would give it back. It'd be kind of like the Charter Revision Commission. We could all meet as a group and talk about it. It is our committee, after all, and it just seems more appropriate as we talked it through that the whole council would have more input into it from the beginning. So this provides more transparency in the appointment process and is more in line with what we do with things like the districting commission, and as we'll see with hired staff. The reason we're proposing to strike this paragraph here you see in 32018 is because the reason that was put in there was because the audit chair had the authority to appoint. And this was to give the rest of the council enough notice, and to also make sure that the audit chair was making sure that they were looking for opening it up to the entire community and not just appointing or anointing one person. And since we'll do it all as a group, this should not be necessary. Next is 32019 through 32021. This is again just changing headers for clarity to say that these sections apply for the audit committee. And then the other thing is where we're striking the committee shall keep a record of its meeting resolutions and findings. That turns out to be in direct contradiction with another section of ordinance that says that the city clerk is responsible for doing that exact function. So that just needs to be removed. Next is 32022. The general duties of the audit committee. It was vital that we clearly articulated the roles and responsibilities in this ordinance revision. You'll see this in the upcoming sections very clearly, starting with 32022. I think we can agree that the general duties section was fairly open-ended, if not outright ambiguous, if you read the old one. This revision deletes all of the prior verbiage and replaces it with well-defined guidance. It tells us what the audit committee's general scope of inquiry is under paragraph A. In other words, this paragraph and its subparagraph provides the committee and others for that matter an overview what they and the council are looking at when the reports are received, when recommendations are made, and when audits are developed. While this may seem like a lot of new information, I want to point out that much of this comes directly from the audit charter, which is a document passed by resolution years ago. So we essentially took the audit charter, the components there, and we just put them in here. So you have a one-stop shop. As we kind of asked around, most people didn't even know there was an audit charter necessarily. And this puts everything in ordinance so that it's all in one convenient location. So these things were not invented out of whole cloth. They were essentially taken from audit charter and put in here in a logical location. Paragraphs B through E go on to explain the committee's responsibilities to the council. It's here where I think this proposed ordinance does a great job of keeping the committee independent while simultaneously keeping it accountable to the council and hence the city. Again, this is coming from audit charter essentially and is moved into ordinance. Paragraph B says that we as a council expect the committee to advise us on certain matters. This is very often done through audit reports, but when considered in combination with the next paragraph, I think we set the right conditions to fully leverage the expertise of our council and our non-council members to develop a proactive yearly audit plan that when implemented will provide the committee the information needed to advise on systemic changes if required. The audit plan is developed and recommended to the council, along with any amendments to it throughout the year. The major change here is that any amendments to the audit plan must be approved by the council. Presently, that's done at the committee level. I think this helps keeps the committee and audit staff on track, but most importantly, it'll give the council visibility of the plan they adopt each year and the authority to make that final amendment. Paragraph D speaks to the organizational structure of the Office of Internal Audit. As you'll see in upcoming sections, there's a division of supervision over staff between the committee and the council. This paragraph says that when it comes to the business of auditing, the committee is responsible for providing the necessary guidance, priority, and potential areas of audit. So in other words, the committee is going to give the marching orders to the auditors as to what you should be auditing and what you should be doing day to day, because after all, the audit committee, including the citizen members, are the experts when it comes to that particular thing. Lastly, and a slight change from the existing ordinance, is how we as a council receive reports. First, the audit committee approves or disapproves the audit reports, and then you may be surprised to learn that presently nobody or entity actually, quote unquote, approves the report. The committee simply has to submit them. Aside from providing for a little more formality, I think the one sentence again helps to provide the committee with a degree of independence. And I fully expect the audit staff will continue to make these reports at the informational meetings, but the second part of this paragraph says the reports will be formally submitted on a council agenda. It would be analogous to transfers of appropriations. The item is simply incorporated and read into the record, and this will be valuable because the reports may garner wider visibility this way, and because it adds a level of formality that's been missing in the past. Next section, 32023. This section is the most significant revision, but I think it goes a long way in properly addressing the challenges we faced. It provides appointment authority for the internal audit manager and the internal auditors with the full council. There's been some questions in the past due to unclear language and ordinance as to how the auditors are appointed. This eliminates those questions and makes the council the clear hiring authority as well as the firing authority. In paragraph A, we really see the division of supervision. In summary, the internal audit manager reports to the council for all personnel and financial matters and to the committee for all functions of the office. I'll show a chart that explains that in a moment. But I want to first mention that this proposed structure came after a tremendous amount of discussion. This structure was arrived at for a few important reasons. It keeps the manager accountable to the council, his or her appointing authority. It provides for more inclusiveness of audit staff and identity with the council. And when it comes to personnel and financial matters, the council retains better visibility, particularly when compared to other council staff, and it retains the auditor's professional independence by having him or her receive the functional guidance and directives of the committee. You should have an organizational chart, which is going to get brought up here. And we'll just take a quick look at this. Currently, the internal audit manager, if we had one, reports to the audit committee. For all intents and purposes, this is typically through the audit chair. On the other hand, the remainder of our other appointed staff report to the operations committee through its chair. This creates some inconsistency, and it put the audit manager on a bit of an island. All of the rest of our staff reports to the city council through the council vice chair, which is our operations chair, but the audit manager reports to the audit chair. That creates a little bit of isolation and inconsistency for audit and the audit manager. It created a situation where the audit manager and audit as a whole really wasn't perceived as reporting to the full council or even interacting with it. And the standards and policies the audit manager was held to could differ from the rest of our employees. What is proposed in this ordinance is a dual reporting line, but note, however, that this particular structure would need to be incorporated into our policies and procedures manual, something we will be bringing forward to the operations committee in the near future. If you look on the left, we envision the internal audit manager falling under the operations committee, as do the clerk, operations manager, and most recently the budget analyst, for personnel and financial purposes. So that includes hiring and firing, budgeting, vacation and sick day requests, and performance management. Practically speaking, the operations chair would supervise the day-to-day administrative aspects of the auditor. Again, there's several benefits to this, as I mentioned before. On the other hand, the internal audit manager receives their marching orders from the committee. This is predominantly through the annual audit plan and other guidance received from the committee. By that, I mean what they will audit and what they will focus on for works tasks. It's recognized that when it comes to performance management of the internal audit manager, there will have to be a close coordination between an ops chair and the audit chair. They would likely be working together, or at least there would be feedback from the audit chair. In the end, however, it's important to note that this structure gives the internal audit team more structured interaction with the entire council and builds in efficiencies for day-to-day management. So going back to the ordinance, make sure I stay on track here. In paragraph B, the manager is given unequivocal guidance, implementing the audit plan, providing timely reports, following up, establishing and implementing a fraud prevention and detection program, and carrying out the duties assigned by the council or the committee. Again, this is verbiage that comes from the audit charter. And lastly, under paragraph C and D, the auditor's professional standards are expressed along with what they are authorized to do in the performance of these duties. These two were taken with some minor revisions from the audit charter, and important in there is what they're authorized to do. It will now say in ordinance what the duties of city and city employees are, that they will give unrestricted access and that they will cooperate. And the last piece, the 32025 audit charter. This new section simply identifies this ordinance as the internal audit charter for purposes of peer review and professional standards. The international standards state that an audit organization needs to have a charter. Here we say unequivocally that this chapter of ordinance acts as our charter. A couple of final notes. By the time we were done, we moved almost all of the verbiage, most of it word for word, from the audit charter into ordinance. We're not eliminating the audit charter or its intent. We are simply moving it into one place. Everyone, the council, audit staff, and the public, the administration, will be able to find the powers and duties of our audit division in one place in ordinance instead of looking around for an audit charter, which many didn't know existed. In tandem with this proposed ordinance, we'll be proposing a repeal of the resolution that established the audit charter. With the adoption of this ordinance, the audit charter becomes superfluous and redundant. So let's go back to the slides, and we just have a couple left here. We went through that. So the next steps, what I'm proposing is a first reading next Tuesday, followed by second reading on the 15th. As I said earlier, quite a bit of collaborative work has gone into this. I can't stress enough how all of your feedback has helped move this along smartly. You'll also notice that the second reading date will also see a resolution repealing the audit charter. And again, I want to stress that the charter isn't going away. We're simply just refining it and incorporating it into ordinance. I will also look for the council's support in memorializing many of the housekeeping measures we've addressed along the way, namely by considering additions to the policies and procedures manual that cover the hiring process for the auditors and updates our staff organizational chart. A good start to that will be the operations committee. We have a proposed hiring process for the internal audit manager and internal auditors that will be submitted to the operations committee for their review and hopefully recommendation to approve and add to our manual by the full city council. And note that that whole procedure essentially memorializes how we've done it for the most part in the past, and I think it'd be a great model for us to consider adoption for all of our employees. And it goes into the nitty gritty of, you'll put all of these certain people together. You'll have one person from the audit committee, you'll have a city councilor, you'll have the HR person there, and then who proposes all the different things and how they move through the process and the executive sessions we have to have and all of that. So with that said, I'd like for us to get started with the hiring process as soon as the ordinance is adopted. That would be for the audit manager, of course. And let me just pause and speak for a moment and just say that we spent quite a bit of time in the HR subgroup looking at how this is done, hearing what the council had to say. We have proposed appointments for all audit staff be directed by the full council, as already discussed. But I also think you'll find that we came up with a fairly detailed process that'll offer consistency in this important process for both the manager and future internal auditors. I anticipate the process will take at least 8 weeks from initial advertisement for a position to the appointment at a council meeting. That means if we're able to adopt this on the 15th, we could potentially have a new hire on board by the end of March. And I'll stand by for any questions. I'm excited to take the next step, which is to hire an audit manager in the coming weeks. Hopefully, if we adopt this. And just a couple other housekeeping items. I was asked to provide maybe a succinct bullet point list of what this is doing, and I've got that jotted down. I've made it. I just got to type it up. I'll get that sent out. And then I should also mention, we're looking at, and I'm having Rich kind of work on this, of coming up with a list of possible performance measures that we can use for auditors. And we're looking at bringing that to the audit committee for them to kind of look at the whole list, because there's a number of ways in which you can measure performance in an audit division, you know, like how many recommendations they make and everything, and then have them look it over and kind of give us some thoughts as to what do you think we should use, and then we can talk about how do we adopt that. And that's been something that, as we've discussed, will be great for everybody, because it's so difficult for us as city councilors that aren't auditors to measure, you know, what is the performance, and are our auditors working to the, you know, to the efficiency or to the speed that they should be. And it also will be great for the auditors, because then they will have clear expectations of, this is what I'm being measured against. And so it's a two-way street, and it would work really well. And with that, I will stand by for questions, and I appreciate all of the time. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Staley.
Well, thank you for the effort that you put into this, Councilor Neitsert, and also for thinking about developing some performance measures, because that's really going to be very helpful moving forward. Because I will just speak from my own experience being here for 2.5 years. I have actually not had a lot of contact with our audit committee, or not committee, but employees. One of the things, and I'm the one who asked Councilor Neitsert to kind of bullet point this, but what you just did has been very helpful. So one of the things that I found concerning was when we did hire our last audit manager, is that we weren't all allowed to make a decision in that. And Councilor Neitsert actually intervened to say, can we look at the resumes so that we all have some input into that. Is this going to be changed with what you're proposing? I'm thinking it is.
Yeah, yes, and that would be part of the adoption. And again, that was one of the things, is that there really was nothing on paper that said who hires an internal audit manager or the internal auditor. And that was one of the things, and that's one of the things we're cleaning up here. And we're saying unequivocally, all of these are employees of ours. And so the whole council would be making that final selection. You know, because it was kind of just sort of whatever the audit manager decided to do. It was done differently in different years. And this really will make it very, very clear. And that's also going to help for accountability going forward. That internal audit manager is going to know you were hired by the council, you report to the council, and I mean everybody, the entire council, and the council can terminate you. And rather than kind of a perception that they're kind of over here doing their thing and nobody's accountable. So. And
when we redrew those, we put new boundaries in the voting in the districting area. They had the redistricting commission. And I don't think this is confidential, we had a lot of people who said, I'd like to be in this Northwest District, I'd like to be in the Central District. We got their applications, and we all got to score those people. And I was thinking at that time, when we hire new employees for our city council staff, that's how it should be handled, that we all have input, we're all looking at it, and we're all part of that decision. So I'm thinking this is what you're saying, because if it is, I'm really excited about it. That we aren't having a certain small group of people looking at a group of resumes and then saying, here's the winner. Because that's how it was done before. Then it wouldn't be any change.
Well, that is largely what we have that would be coming forward as a proposal, would be to formalize kind of how we do it. It gets very difficult to, I know we can discuss it, but to, as a group, be able to go through, resumes and make selections in some of those ways, because obviously you can't do that publicly.
Well, if it's we did it in executive session with that redistricting.
Sure, I'm just.
And so I think that would be very appropriate when we have it, and you're looking over at Councilor Kiley here. I think that's one thing I would like to see changed. So if that's how we're going to go forward, that would be wonderful. I wanted to know, I'm not seeing it in here, maybe I'm missing it, Councilor Neitzer, but how do we appoint the chair of the audit committee?
That continues unchanged, as every committee would be appointed by the chair of the council. There's no proposed change to that.
Should that maybe be in here? Because we're talking about because it's saying how the members are being appointed. So maybe I think having the chair of the audit committee should be stated in here as well.
So I guess we can take a look at that. It might be stated somewhere else in ordinance. I don't know.
And your term, the term of the chair is how long? Because I didn't realize that I'm on the audit committee, that we're on here for 1 year and then we can be reappointed. What's the term of the chair?
Same thing, it's up to the discretion of the chair of the council.
1 year, yeah. I think, to me, it would be appropriate to have that listed in here as long as we're talking about the rest of us being on the audit committee. I have a few other questions, but I will sit
Councilor
back.
Kiley.
Thank you. Regarding the selection process, I would see that we could have a much more open process than what we had in the past. In terms of where the difficulty lies is in the terms of an interview committee. Obviously, we can't have 8 members of the city council involved on an interview committee because it'd have to be done publicly. And I'm not for sure many applicants would want to be subjected to that, nor would some applicants even wish to have their current employer made aware that they're looking at other jobs. So there's complications involved with that, but I think in terms of the applications, where the possibility for improvement lies is with the applications received and a very strict distribution of applications under strict understanding that they cannot be shared with anybody outside the immediate city council, and then rate those individuals and then forward that information back to the audit chair. I could see it working in that fashion.
Any other questions? I have several, but I'll refrain. Go ahead, Councilor Staley.
So in follow-up on Councilor Kiley's comments, yet I agree. Of course, anytime we go into executive session, and I want this stated for the record, I ultimately, absolutely respect the confidentiality of an executive session. We know that.
That's good.
Other parts of our correspondence are not necessarily confidential, but that executive, just for the public's knowledge, that is totally secret. But what we could also do is redact their names or anything else that would be proprietary in that, just so we're not saying Jane Doe, but we could just have their experience. But that would be wonderful. So the other thing, Councilor Neitzer, on 32.022, I'm not sure that all of these things, some of these things that you've crossed out here, I think could be beneficial, and I'm not seeing them restated on the next page. So that you're wiping all of this out? The
You know,
committee shall also receive reports from the auditors and shall make recommendations to the mayor and the city council. How is that last statement, how's that going to be reenacted?
I'm sorry, could you read one more time the sentence you're referring to?
The last sentence of 32.022 that you're crossing out. The committee shall also receive reports from the auditors and shall make recommendations to the mayor and city council of changes of the city's financial practices. How are you replacing that?
So, you know, I think what this was kind of getting at was that the audit reports are made to the audit committee, and then we would have these informational meetings, and then that was kind of the end of it. And I think we're actually solidifying a little bit more and saying that we're going to continue doing all of this, but then they're going to be submitted, and I don't know if I have the section in front of me where they're submitted formally to the city council, where they'll be read into the record and it'll be attached. And so I don't think this goes away. I think it's just getting reworded and made actually a little bit stronger. And of course, the committee anytime can bring us, you know, make recommendations to us. So,
And Councilor Neitzert, if I may, Madam Chair, everything that is listed from A and then continuing on to page 3 through E replaces what's been crossed out under 32.022.
Right, so you're saying it should be apples to apples.
not necessarily. Some of it did move
Be
around.
much more
so,
detailed, however.
Yeah, there is more detail, but that particular piece, I believe, would be in, I can find it for you, but.
Okay, well,
I may have to bring- I may
we'll
have
be
to get back
looking
to
this
you on
over.
this
I certainly don't want to lose any essence of anything. Was that, then, you know, you said, you have under, I'm just questioning about the procedure on page 4 here, the last page. Obtain the necessary assistance of personnel within city divisions from the city of Sioux Falls where they perform audits, as well as specialized service. You know where I'm at with that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, now, my understanding is that as counselors, we are not to go to personnel within the city, we are to go through department heads. Maybe that, are you saying that our audit committee, or our audit office is going to be able to go into, speak with individual employees within the administration?
Yeah, and this is word for word for the audit charter. This is the way it has been, and it's.
They can do that. They
Yeah,
don't have
and
to go through a department head.
Yeah, in the operation of their need to do work, so.
And then my last thing, a request here is on your flow chart here. Okay, because we got the operations chair with a whole lot of responsibility here. In charge of the city clerk, budget analyst, operations manager, internal audit manager, internal auditors, going down to that. Who chooses the operations chair?
The operations chair would be the vice
chair.
or the vice chair of the city council.
Selected
Higher
by the city
procedures.
council.
Right,
Yeah, as voted on.
The operations chair is the vice chair of the city council.
correct.
So Marshall's the operations chair right now. So he's in
Correct.
charge of all these different things. Could you make a flow chart of what we have now?
In terms, could you just help me?
This is your proposed ordinance flow chart.
Oh, got it. Sure.
I'd like to see the comparison of how that's changing, if you could have both of those things.
Essentially, all it is the internal audit manager and the internal auditors are under the audit chair. You just take that little bottom purple box and swoop it on over to the audit chair, and that's where they're.
But I'd like that written down.
We do. We have the existing. We can send you both.
Visually, that would be nice, thank you.
Before now.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Councilor Kiley.
And this was, really, this came out of a discussion, as Councilor Neitzert had indicated in one of his previous slides. This recommendation really came from the HR subgroup, discussions with the city council, as well as staff interviews too, that there was kind of a disconnect between our audit and what was happening with the rest of the council. And in the past, who do they go to just for something as simple as I need time off for an appointment or vacation time? And this just clarifies that to make it consistent with our other employees.
Go ahead, Councilor.
And just to follow up on that, a lot of this seems very subtle, but in making some of these changes, you know, again, you had kind of an island where the auditors would talk to the audit chair, and for most part, it would stop there. And they didn't necessarily even feel like they were part of the council. They were just kind of down in the basement, doing their thing, talking to the audit chair. And a lot of this where, you know, it says that, I mean, we have to designate one person, but like at the operations manager, but they're doing that on the behalf of the full council. So when it comes to things like performance reviews and things like that, then it becomes a whole where we're all having more input and visibility into it, and that there's hopefully going to be more natural interaction. I could foresee the audit manager, which isn't happening right now, or it wasn't happening before, when they have the weekly staff meetings, the audit manager would be sitting in there right next to our legislative operations manager and everybody else, and it's very clear that you're part of the team. You're not just your own little deal over here. You're just as important, and you're just as accountable to what are you doing every week as everybody else in the organization. And so it starts to bring it together as, you know, one unit, I guess. So.
And I'll chime in a little bit. I had that weekly meeting written down right there because I know that's something that we hadn't done in the past with that. One thing too, I just want to draw your attention, the budget analyst used to report to the fiscal committee chair, and that was switched in 2017, I want to say, end of 2017, maybe 2018, to really streamline the process too. So naturally, for me, it makes sense to have that all in under that same consistency and accountability portion of it. The one question, two points I want to make. One question I have is, I'm assuming that the second internal auditor will wait to be hired until the audit manager comes in and gets to make that selection. Is that how you see that happening?
Yeah, and this wasn't just mine, but just kind of in discussion in our little HR subgroup, it totally made sense that you would hire the manager first, and then they would have ownership and buy-in and input into who is really going to, I mean, they're going to be their employee.
Right.
They ought to be in there making that decision versus doing it in the reverse. Not to mention the fact that, you know, you already have one who doesn't have a full-time manager. Why would you bring on a second without you bring the manager on first?
Right. Will any of their job duties be updated with the internal audit or the audit manager? Has that been looked at through part of this process as well?
The job descriptions were reviewed. There were some minor semantical changes, and I did also have Rich look it over, and the one big thing would be, again, like I talked about, like the whole thing about what are their performance measures. Now, where that would go, I'm not entirely sure. I'll be probably looking around for some guidance. Is it in job description? It could be, or could it be in a policy, or, you know, as far as like whatever it may be. Like I said, there's lots of metrics that you can measure your auditors on, how many recommendations they make a year, how many audits they do a year. And looking at some of the international groups, they'll give you a list of, here's like 12 or so that are good to use, and most organizations will pick 3 or 4 that are important to them.
Right.
But, so that would be.
That makes sense. And then I wanted to address 2 more quick things. As far as the audit chair, you know, I certainly see value in having the consistency of that audit chairperson. You've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in this, I'll say, and put a lot of hard work, as well as a lot of people have. And so having that consistency of that audit chairperson stay the same for more than a year is super beneficial. I mean, it just makes sense in my mind. Depends on who that next chairperson is that makes those assignments, but generally speaking, the last 2 years, how we've done it is we've really taken feedback as far as, hey, where do you want to serve and what's important to you, regardless of, you know, and can it be made that way where, you know, somebody may have 0 desire to be on land use, and so then you're put on public services or whatever it is. And so having that buy-in and feedback is something that I think that we as a council are committed to doing as well. The other thing, and I know this is, I don't want to like drop a bomb on it or anything. I just want to say, with the operations chair overseeing all of this and being the vice chair, the consistency is so important for our staff, and having that change year after year after year, in my mind, would be a little bit frustrating. Looking out for our employees, having that consistency, not complacence, but consistency of having reporting to the same person for maybe 2 years, and I don't know what that looks like, because right now it says vice chair is the chair of operations, and I'm not trying to take that away from anyone, and I'm certainly not volunteering for that role right now either. But just think about the consistency for our staff. When you have your performance evaluation, this isn't a hobby for them. You know, this is their job. This is them providing for their family. This is making ends meet. And so having that consistency in reporting, sure, they report to all of us, but when you do the review and the performance evaluations, I think it's really important to have kind of that same thing coming forward. Again, I'm not sure where or how that looks, but just something I want to put in the minds of everyone to say, does it make sense that we have this be the vice chair every time? Or should that operations chairperson be voted on by this council just like the operation committees are? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there to think about as we move forward with some of this as we look at changes. And maybe it's fine how it is. I don't know. Councilor Kiley. Neitzer, sorry.
Yeah, so I just do want to make
Sorry.
clear that I don't think you're dropping a bomb on anything, because we really, really the ordinance says that these people are hired by and terminated by the city council. Now, how that authority is delegated is really an operational question. We can decide to do whatever we want. In fact, that was one of the discussions we had was, that's it's tough for our staff because they're one of the few who's realistically their boss changes every year.
Every year.
And so that's something that could be discussed on a wider basis. It's not just an audit thing, but we really don't, for the most part, I don't think get in the business of talking and saying operations. So really who it ultimately is our designee, I guess, for who's going to approve vacation or who they talk to about that. I mean, that's open for discussion. That's kind of outside of the scope, but it's a good point. It's something we've talked about.
And
so.
especially as you look at all 8 of us and our unique backgrounds, I mean, we all have different strengths and weaknesses, and I haven't managed staff in a long time, but we have some counselors that have managed staff and others that may have no desire to, and so having those relationships is really important, and it takes diligence to keeping our staff accountable and making sure that we're available and that we're also there for our staff and being an advocate for them as well. So however that shakes out, we can see. Councilor Selberg.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would think anything's open to discussion. There's certainly always room for improvement. So, let's keep talking about this type of thing, but very thorough job as usual. Councilor Neitzer, nice job.
Councilor Staley, did you have a follow-up?
Going back to the accountability factor, Councilor Neitzer, and for the public, they may not know this, but he has been sending us out, I think, weekly reports of what he's doing. I agree, he's been working very hard at this position. It would be appropriate to me to have the audit staff maybe give us a monthly report of what they're doing, where they've been. That would help us to have a sense that where it's moving forward to. And then as far as the committees, who's chair of a committee, that's all determined by the people who are elected as the leadership. I think having this discussion here might be appropriate that we developed a new position called staff chair or staff. Maybe there could be 2 people on that committee that would work with the staff. Why does it have to be within that operations thing? And I don't think the public is also aware that, just for documentation, the chair and the vice chair, they go to extra meetings, that they go to every mayor's meeting on a Friday morning. There's a lot of extra time that they put into, they give us reports. They have to be very diligent about passing information on. So it has a lot of added responsibilities. And I appreciate that you've done that so well. And so this is a good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. And I would just like to state publicly that I greatly appreciate the work that Councilor Neitzer put into this. I mean, this has actually become a second full-time job for Councilor Neitzer. He's put in a lot of time and invested some blood, sweat, and tears into this process as well. And I'd also like to recognize the work that our city clerk, Tom Greco, did serving on the HR subcommittee, as well as Jane Hannesed serving on that subcommittee too. They put in a lot of time, much more so than this counselor invested on that. And then also great thanks to Rich and Abby, because a lot of this input came from them as well, very valuable input. And we felt that it was necessary that we really nailed this down before we proceeded with the hiring of a new internal audit manager. We didn't want to go in with some of these questions and not be able to actually address their questions is what the job entails. I mean, we needed to know this information before we opened that up in a hiring process. And there has, but in the meantime, the audit reports that were presented to us this afternoon is evidence of the work that has been put in by 1 to 2 people. Rich coming on very graciously part-time. And so we greatly appreciate the work of our staff. They have been producing audits, as is their job, and we are now set to move forward. And I look forward to being able to get to the point where we're full staff. But again, Councilor Neitzer, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. And Abby, I'll add in, it's been fun to see you flourish and really grow. I know you came at an interesting time, and so seeing your audits and seeing the work that you've put in and sticking it out too, thank you for all your effort that you've done with audit and sticking around. We are to the portion of public input. Come forward, state your name. Just don't put them too close together or it muffles. You can lower them if you want.
I was reading Councilor Steely's notes on Facebook about the Metro Communications meeting, and then I also read the Argus story. And then I had a great conversation with Commissioner Barth, some of his thoughts on what we should do. And I felt that we're missing a great opportunity here. I think we should take Metro 911, we should put it under the city purview so that the employees can get good health benefits, can get good pay. I know those are some issues. And then just have the county and the other entities that use 911 just pay the city for their services. The other thing I think is a missed opportunity here is with the 5G network. We could actually use those lease agreements to help pay for 911. You know, I pay $90 a year. I just got my renewal. I pay $90 a year for my tags on my car. You think it costs $90 to make a sticker? No. They use the money to build the roads. So why not these 5G things, instead of $175 a month, which I think is completely ridiculous, $5,000 or $10,000 a year. I mean, $175 a year. So why not $5,000 or $10,000 a year and help pay for 911? Verizon and these other telephone companies make millions of dollars from us, and we're only going to charge them $175 a year. We could fund 911. We could tell the communications companies, we're not taking advantage of you. We're not making money from you. We're taxing you, that we're leasing these poles, and the money you use to lease the poles goes to our 911. I don't think that's taking advantage of them. But no, let's just raise taxes on everybody else to pay for it. That's what we usually do. And then there was also a talk about in the audit about personnel, auditing personnel. I've believed for a long time that there should be a change in city ordinance that all management and directors within the city live within the city of Sioux Falls. I have a real issue with somebody paying taxes in Brandon while they come to work for us. So it's okay to work for the city and take money from the city for their paycheck, but apparently the city's not good enough for them to live in. I don't agree with that. I think that city ordinance should be changed, that all director and all management, it's going to be hard to do people who are not part of management because the metro area is so large. But I think with management and directors, they should all live in Sioux Falls. And I've felt that for a long time. Anytime when there's an emergency or anything like that, they need to be available immediately. I mean, my cousin works for the hospital in Canton, and they require her to live within so many minutes of the hospital. She'd like to live in Sioux Falls, but she can't because of her job requirement. So that's something to consider. And then also I find this whole thing with the internal auditor kind of ironic. The reason it all came about, as we've discussed, is an elected official decided to break city charter, and nobody charged him with anything. Got away with it, pretty much. He got away with it. And what the government did, instead of punishing him and charging him with something, they decided to create this huge internal auditing department to fix a problem that was created by one person, the mayor, the elected official. How ridiculous is that the taxpayers of Sioux Falls are holding the bag when an elected official is the one who broke city charter? So now we have all these rules and regulations and internal auditing department because no one was brave enough to file charges against the man. Pretty funny, myself. That's what always happens. When a government official, a politician is corrupt, the taxpayers are the ones that take it in the brunt. Thank you.
Any other public input? Seeing none, we will adjourn this informational and see you at 7 o'clock.